A locked door and a feeling that won't stay quiet. Who gives in first, the badge or the heart? Will the marshal's hired hand find his way to that cell and stay? A YouTube-safe LGBTQ plus slow-burn Western romance. Some men are built to be kept in, some men are built to do the keeping, and most men spend their whole lives never asking which one they actually are. The first thing Silas Bourne noticed that night was the sound of someone coming apart. Not the fast kind, not glass hitting stone. The slow kind, quiet with something raw underneath it, the kind of stillness that settles over a man once he's stopped fighting back. Silas had been dozing in the loft above the marshal's barn when the noise drifted to him on the dry autumn air, slipping through a gap in the siding. He lay there a moment, eyes on the dark beams above, while a roosting owl resettled its feathers somewhere in the shadows. He told himself it was the wind. He told himself a few more things besides, the way anyone does when they already know what they're about to do and are stalling against it. Then the sound returned. He was off the ladder before his boots were laced, crossing the yard between barn and jailhouse in the dark, the cold night biting at his bare arms like a caution he wasn't going to heed. The Arizona Territory sky stretched out huge and unconcerned above him, salted with stars, and Silas moved beneath it the way he always did, quiet, careful, head down, shoulders pulled tight like a man bracing against something invisible. Lamplight cut a thin gold seam beneath the jailhouse door. Silas pressed his back to the outer wall, pulse loud in his ears, and listened. "I already told you," said a voice he didn't know, young, level, controlled in the way that costs a person something to maintain. "I didn't steal a thing." A beat, then the flat, worn-out chuckle of Marshal Tate Ackerman, the laugh of a man who'd already settled the matter in his head and had no patience left for debate. "Boy," Ackerman said, "you were caught with the Bourne herd mark scorched over with a Whitlock brand, found 2 miles off Whitlock land with a running iron tucked in your gear. Now I've listened to plenty of tall tales in my time and my back's aching, and I'd appreciate it if you'd let this one rest. I'm telling you what happened." "I'm sure you believe you are." A longer pause, then the unmistakable clang of a cell door swinging shut, iron striking iron, a sound Silas knew well. He'd oiled those hinges himself. Ackerman's boots crossed the plank floor toward the front door. "Get some rest," the marshal said. "Circuit judge comes in 2 weeks. You'll want your wits about you." Silas flattened himself against the wall as Ackerman stepped out and walked past without a glance, heading toward the house where a candle burned in his wife's window. Silas waited until the footsteps died away. He waited until the crickets and the far-off grumble of cattle were the only sounds left. He waited until there was no sensible reason left to stand out there in the cold. Then he went in anyway. The jailhouse smelled of dust, old pine, and the ghost of pipe smoke. 2 cells sat in back, iron-barred and narrow. In the nearer one, a young man sat on the edge of a cot, forearms braced on his knees, head bowed into his hands. Silas noticed the hands before anything else, open, loose, dangling between the man's knees like something set down and maybe never picked back up. He stopped in the doorway between the front office and the cells, unsure why he'd come in at all, unsure what he expected. Then the young man lifted his head, and not any of the moments that followed, though plenty came after, some dramatic, some unbearably tender, one that eventually rearranged the whole architecture of Silas's life. That was the moment he'd return to years later, trying to find the exact hinge point where everything had shifted. Dim jailhouse outside Cottonwood Bend, Arizona Territory, October 1887. A young man looking up from a cot, dust caught in dark hair, a shallow cut above one eyebrow still weeping in a slow, stubborn way. And eyes that even then, even half-shadowed and worn thin with exhaustion and the particular sting of being caged while someone else kept the key, were the most alert, watchful, quietly alive eyes Silas Bourne had ever come across. "You gonna stand there all night," the young man said, "or come in?" His name was Jesse Calloway, 23 years old, raised on a family spread outside Tanner's Crossing that had worked the same stretch of scrub and rock for nearly 30 years. He'd ridden into Cottonwood Bend that afternoon with $3 to his name, a sound horse, and not the slightest plan of spending the night behind bars. He told Silas all of it over the next half hour, the 2 of them on either side of the iron, Jesse on the cot, Silas perched on a 3-legged stool dragged over from the deputy's desk. Silas listened the way he always did, fully, with his whole attention, in a way that sometimes unsettled people who weren't used to being heard so completely. Jesse wasn't a man who spoke freely. Silas could tell that right off. There was a deliberateness to his words, like someone who'd learned the hard way that loose talk in the wrong direction could cost you. He kept to short, exact sentences. No embellishing, no fishing for sympathy. Just the facts, the horse, the altered brand, the running iron, the Whitlock spread, delivered with the flat tiredness of a man who knows he's telling the truth and watching it lose anyway. You said somebody set you up, Silas said once Jesse finished. Who? Don't know for certain. A pause, but you've got a guess. Jesse studied him. In the lamp's glow his eyes were a deep whiskey brown, the color of creek water running over red stone, moving over Silas's face with a careful, unhurried assessment, neither cold nor warm, just weighing. Maybe, he said. That's not nothing. No, Jesse agreed, it's not nothing. He tilted his head and something in his face shifted just barely, a hairline crack in all that careful control. You work here? For the marshal, mostly the barn, feed, tack, errands. A pause. Oiled those cell hinges myself as it happens. Jesse glanced toward the bars, something close to a smile, reluctant, ghosted across his mouth. Quiet hinges. I take pride in it, Silas said, and this time the almost smile traveled a little further, though not all the way. Jesse Calloway, Silas would come to learn, wasn't a man who smiled easily or for no reason, but the lines around his mouth eased and he looked down at his hands, and Silas felt something complicated and unbidden stir in his chest. He stayed another hour, telling himself he was only checking that the cut wasn't serious. He'd seen head wounds turn bad before. He found the small medical kit Deputy Wyatt Hale kept in the desk and brought back clean cloth and a tin of salve, talking Jesse into pressing them to the wound through the bars. Jesse did it without complaint, methodical, the way a man does who's used to patching himself up. When the bleeding eased, he passed the cloth and tin back and leaned against the cell wall, studying Silas with that same careful weighing look. Why are you still here? He asked, not accusing, just curious. Silas turned the question over, discarded several honest answers and landed on the simplest one. Don't know, he said. Jesse considered that. Fair enough, he said, like it satisfied him just fine. Silas climbed back to the loft eventually when the lamp downstairs had burned low and the cold had turned his breath visible. He lay on his bedroll staring at the rafters, the owl gone now, the stars shifted west through the crack in the wall, and thought about whiskey-colored eyes and hands hanging open between a stranger's knees like an unanswered question. Sleep didn't come for a long while. Marshal Ackerman had no idea Silas had gone into the jailhouse. Silas felt fairly sure of that. Ackerman wasn't a subtle man, and if he'd known he'd have said so loudly, probably with a lecture on the limits of a stable hand's job. Ackerman wasn't unkind, exactly. He was the type who believed himself fair, which is sometimes harder to be around than someone who admits he isn't. He'd taken Silas on 2 years back when Silas arrived in Cottonwood Bend with $9 and a letter of reference from a rancher near Prescott, and he'd never once asked the questions Silas spent most of his life quietly dreading. That counted for a great deal in Silas's reckoning. He did his morning chores, hay forked, hooves checked, troughs filled, a stretch of paddock fence mended where it had been threatening to give for a week, all with his usual careful thoroughness, even as his eyes kept drifting toward the jailhouse window more often than the job required. Deputy Hale brought breakfast around 8. Cold biscuits and a tin cup of coffee, the same plain meal he ate himself, which Silas noted with a quiet relief. Hale was decent, didn't see any virtue in making a prisoner suffer. Silas was mending a harness on the bench outside the barn when Jesse was brought out for the first time in daylight, a short loop around the jailhouse yard under Hale's watch, the bare minimum the law required. Silas kept his eyes on the buckle in his hands, working it with great focus enough that he could still register at the edge of his vision the exact moment Jesse noticed him. A pause in his unhurried circuit. Morning, Jesse said. Silas looked up. Morning. Jesse's gaze moved over him again, that same careful measuring. Then he finished his loop without looking back, and Hale led him inside, and Silas returned to his buckle and realized he'd been holding his breath. He let it go slow. The morning sun warmed the back of his neck. The buckle slid home. This is going to be trouble, he thought, and went back to work. He told himself he wasn't going back. No good reason to. The man was fed, housed, his wound clean, and in 2 weeks a circuit judge would settle it, and Silas's job was horses and fence rails and harness leather, not the welfare of strangers locked in cages with eyes like creek water over red stone. He went back at 10. This time Jesse was awake, sitting on the floor with his back to the wall, a scrap of paper balanced on his knee, writing with a pencil stub. He looked up when Silas entered, and something in him eased, the way shoulders do when a person's been bracing for the worst and the worst turns out not to come. Didn't think you'd come back, Jesse said. Wasn't going to, Silas said. What changed? Silas thought it over, again landed on the truest answer, don't know. The almost smile returned, fuller this time. You say that a lot. I'm an honest man, sometimes honest is I don't know. Jesse turned the paper face down on his knee, not dramatically, just naturally, the way you'd close a journal. That's an unusual trait in a man. They sat with that a moment. The lamp burned low and warm, a horse shifted and breathed somewhere in the barn. What were you writing? Silas asked, then immediately wished he hadn't, too direct, too interested, tipping something over, but Jesse didn't look bothered. He glanced at the paper, then back up. Letter to my brother telling him I'm here. Why not let him come? Because he'd ride in and do something foolish and end up in the cell next to mine. A beat. He's 16, still thinks foolishness done for family is the same thing as courage. Isn't it sometimes? Jesse thought about it. Sometimes, he allowed, not this time. Why not this time? Jesse looked at him again, long and steady. That whiskey-brown focus Silas was starting to understand wasn't coldness but its opposite, total attention, the way an animal watches something it hasn't decided about yet. Not afraid, just alert. Because I think I know what's happening here, Jesse said slowly, and if I'm right, the worst thing I could do is make noise. Silas leaned forward, forearms on his knees. Tell me. Jesse studied him a long moment, then did. The Whitlock Ranch was the biggest cattle operation in that stretch of the territory, 4,000 acres of good range and water rights that Garrett Whitlock had spent decades assembling, long before statehood was even a serious conversation. He wasn't a man who built something that sized by thinking small. His methods, buying up water rights, land grants, absorbing competing herds, were always technically lawful, and always left an unpleasant taste in anyone who looked closely. Whitlock was 60-some years old and patient the way a snare is patient, and most of the county knew it, and most had decided knowing was enough. What Jesse suspected, with the particular cold dread of a man watching a pattern click into place, was that this wasn't the first time. 2 other small ranchers in the past year had been accused, out of nowhere, of brand tampering. One paid a fine and sold off his herd to cover it. One went to trial, lost, and sold his land to settle the judgment. Both parcels, Jesse's father had written him 2 months back, had ended up, within half a year, in the hands of a holding company nobody in the territory recognized, but which his father had traced, through layers of paperwork, to a law office in Prescott that handled Garrett Whitlock's affairs. Jesse wasn't a small rancher himself. His family spread near Tanner's Crossing wasn't in Whitlock's path. But he'd passed through Cottonwood Bend 3 weeks earlier, no business there, and while riding the road along Whitlock's east boundary at first light, he'd seen 2 of Whitlock's hands working cattle near the fence, one of them running a hot iron over a brand that wasn't Whitlock's own. He'd kept riding, told himself it wasn't his concern. Made it 20 miles before the weight of what he'd seen got too heavy to keep carrying quietly. He'd turned back, asked a question in the wrong place. 3 days later, someone slipped a running iron into his saddlebag and reported his horse to the law. Silas took it all in without a word. When Jesse finished, the jailhouse sat in heavy quiet. You told the marshal this, Silas said, not a question. Told him I was set up. And not interested, Jesse's voice stayed flat. He's not Whitlock's man, Silas said, because he knew that much to be true. Ackerman was stubborn, tired, sometimes wrong, but never bought. Doesn't have to be, Jesse said. He just has to be a man looking at evidence he can see with no appetite for chasing evidence he can't. A pause. What he can see says I'm a thief. What I'm telling him would mean investigating the richest man in the county on a stranger's word, a stranger already sitting in his jail. The logic was airtight and miserable. Silas studied him through the bars, the stillness, the careful conservation of energy, the look of a man settling in for a long fight rather than one already lost. What do you need? Silas asked. Jesse's eyes snapped to him. What? To prove it, what would you need? A long silence, the lamp flickered in a draft. There's a man named Coombs, Jesse said finally. Works for Whitlock. He was one of the 2 I saw. If somebody got him alone, away from the ranch, he might talk. He's got people depending on him, not the type who'd want to swing for Whitlock's ambitions. He stopped. But I can't exactly go find him from in here. The silence that followed carried the obvious, unasked question, pressing against the space between them like something with real weight. I'm not asking you to, Jesse said. I know you're not. You'd lose your job. I know. You'd lose worse if Ackerman decided you'd interfered. I know, Silas said again, quieter. Jesse looked at him through the bars, the lamp low now, throwing long shadows across his face, strong jaw, dark brows, the cut above his eyes scabbing clean. He looked like a man working hard to hold his expression neutral and discovering that neutrality cost more than he'd planned for. "Why would you do anything for me?" Jesse asked. Quiet, direct, not rhetorical, he actually wanted the answer. Silas thought about it a long time, looked down at his own hands. "Don't know," he said finally. A beat. Then Jesse laughed, a real one, short and soft and surprised out of him, the kind that skips past whatever gate usually holds it back. Silas looked up. Jesse was shaking his head, mouth tilted, something unguarded flickering across his face before it folded back into place. "You're going to keep saying that?" Jesse said. "Probably," Silas agreed, and the night went on and the lamp burned to nothing and they kept talking low in the dark. 2 weeks, 14 days, that was the frame around everything now, the length of rope left before it ran out. Silas moved through his mornings carrying that math in the back of his mind, doing chores with a thoroughness that had always come naturally but now also served as a way of not thinking too hard about what his evenings had become. He went every night. He knew it wasn't wise, he went anyway. They talked about everything. That surprised Silas. He'd expected the conversation to hover near the practical problem, Coombs and the fence line and what came next. Instead it kept widening, the way water spreads when you give it room. Jesse asked questions carefully, deliberately, like he'd weighed whether asking was worth the exposure first. He asked about Silas's family, a mother in New Mexico, he wrote sometimes, an older brother who'd taken a different path entirely, someone Silas thought of the way you think of a country you used to live in. He asked how Silas had landed in Cottonwood Bend. He asked what Silas thought about at night when the barn went quiet. That last one came on the fourth night, dropped casually into a conversation about something else entirely, and it landed somewhere in Silas that required more of him than he was used to giving. "Honest answer," Silas said. "Always." He was quiet a moment, the night pressing at the walls. "I think about whether I'm living the right life," he said. "Not in a bad way, just whether this is where I was always headed or whether I took a wrong turn somewhere and whether those two things even feel different." Jesse took that in. "What do you think?" "I think," Silas said slowly, "most of the time I can't tell if I'm exactly where I'm meant to be or exactly where I'm not, and the feeling's similar enough either way that it might not matter." Jesse went quiet for a long stretch. "That's the most honest thing anybody's said to me in a good while." "You ask honest questions." "Do I?" "You do, you just dress them up casual, they're not." Something flickered across Jesse's face, exposed, then quickly reined back in. He looked away, then back. "My father says I overcomplicate things," he said. "I don't think that's what's happening." "What do you think's happening?" And there it was, the edge of something, the place where the talk looked down into something steep. Both of them felt it, and neither moved toward it or away, just held it carefully between them. "I think you're someone who pays attention," Silas said finally. "And people call that complicated because it's easier than paying attention back." The quiet that followed was a different texture than before, charged, careful, full of something unnamed. Jesse looked at his hands, then up. "Yeah," he said softly, "maybe." On the sixth day, Silas rode out to find Coombs. He told himself a string of sensible things while saddling his horse, that he was checking a stretch of fence the marshal had mentioned, that Coombs's place near the eastern edge of Whitlock land just happened to be in that direction, that stopping to talk to a man he passed wasn't the same as seeking him out. Not technically, not in any way that could land him in real trouble. He was lying to himself, knew it, and kept saddling the horse anyway. Coombs turned out to be a small, weathered man in his 40s with the worn-down look of someone who'd been carrying something heavy long enough to forget what light felt like. He was splitting wood outside his house when Silas rode up, watching him approach with the flat wariness of a man used to clocking who passed on that road. Silas dismounted, introduced himself as the marshal's hand-checking fence, said he'd run low on water and wondered about the well. Coombs studied him a long moment, then nodded toward it. While Silas worked the pump handle and drank, Coombs kept splitting wood with mechanical steadiness, not needing to think about what his arms were doing. Silas talked about weather, fence lines, the road. He watched Coombs's shoulders, the place where the weight showed. Then quietly, "There's a young man in the marshal's jail right now. Jesse Calloway might know the name." The axe paused one beat, then came down again. "Don't know it," Coombs said. "No," Silas said, easy and level. "Figured you wouldn't." He handed back the ladle, kept his attention steady and unhurried. Trials in 8 days, brand tampering, running iron found in his bag. A pause. Says he saw something out by the east fence 3 weeks back, early morning. The axe didn't pause this time, but something shifted in Coombs's jaw, tightened, then released with visible effort. Don't know anything about that either, Coombs said. No, Silas said, I don't suppose you do. He watched the axe fall, the wood split clean. He's got a brother, 16, the kind of boy who'd ride 100 miles to do something brave and stupid for family. Another pause, shame if it came to that. Coombs set the next log on the block and looked at it a long moment without lifting the axe. His shoulders had gone very still. Nice place, Silas said, good water. He gathered his reins, appreciate your time. He rode off without looking back, all the way to the fence line he'd claimed to be checking, and actually checked it because he was thorough and because he needed the time to let his pulse settle. The fence held fine. A hawk circled wide over the flats to the south on some lazy thermal, trusting the air to hold it up. He told Jesse about it that night through the bars. Jesse listened with his forearms on his knees, eyes on the floor, and went quiet a long while after Silas finished. You shouldn't have done that, he said finally. Probably not, Silas agreed. If Coombs goes running to Whitlock's people. He won't. Jesse looked up, you sound sure. Not sure, Silas said, just think I read him right. A pause. He's carrying something he doesn't want to carry anymore, sometimes that's enough. Jesse held his gaze, that same measuring quality but warmer underneath now, less guarded. Why did you do that? He asked, quieter than before. Silas met his eyes, I think you know why. The silence between them sat very still. Jesse looked down, Silas. You don't have to say anything, Silas said. I'm not asking for anything, just wanted you to know. He stood, steadier than he felt. Get some rest, 8 days isn't long. He walked out before Jesse could answer, stood in the cold with his hand flat against the jailhouse wall, heart doing complicated things, the stars overhead as enormous and indifferent as ever. On the 7th day, Jesse asked for paper and a pencil, and Silas brought both. On the 8th, Silas brought a book from his own small stack in the loft, a worn copy of the Three Musketeers he'd carried for years and read more than once. He passed it through the bars without comment. Jesse looked at it, then up at Silas with something so unguarded that Silas had to glance away briefly. Thank you, Jesse said. It's a good book, I've read it twice. Twice? Silas looked back, Jesse's mouth held that almost smile, something warmer behind it now. We can argue about whether that makes giving it away more or less generous, Silas said. More, Jesse said immediately, definitely more. He turned the book in his hands, studied the spine, the worn cover. You carry it with you, why this one? Silas thought about it. A man who spends his whole life staying invisible so he can do what needs doing, he said, and then has to figure out what to do once he doesn't need to hide anymore. Find that interesting. Jesse was quiet a moment. Do you feel invisible? He asked, careful and direct the way all his questions were, landing somewhere tender in Silas's chest. Sometimes, a pause, not right now. The moment held. Then Jesse looked down at the book and Silas sat on the stool, and they spent the next 2 hours reading apart in a shared, comfortable quiet that felt, in its own way, like the most intimate thing Silas had experienced in a long time. On the 9th day, things got complicated in a new direction. Deputy Wyatt Hale was 25, broad through the shoulders, easygoing, and had lately decided that Silas Bourne was interesting. Silas had clocked the slow build of it over the past couple weeks, extra conversation, invitations to share a meal, Hale crossing the yard between jailhouse and barn more often than his job strictly called for. Silas liked Hale fine. He was easy company, without the undertow of something unspoken that made most exchanges feel like picking through an obstacle course in the dark. But on the 9th day, Hale found him at the water trough with 2 cups of coffee and the look of a man who decided to say something. Gonna ask you a thing, Hale said, handing over a cup, and you can tell me to mind my business. All right. You spending time with the Calloway prisoner? A beat, yeah, some. Hale studied him, harder to read than his easy manner suggested. Why? Think he might be telling the truth about being framed. Another look, longer, with more behind it. That's not the only reason, Hale said, not accusing, not even surprised, just observant in that way Silas was learning he had. Silas looked out at the paddock, where the gelding he'd been nursing through a strained tendon moved a little easier today. Something, anyway. No, he admitted, it's not the only reason. Hale turned his cup slowly. Silas, he said carefully, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but that man's headed to trial in 5 days, and either way it goes, he's not staying in Cottonwood Bend. He's got family near Tanner's Crossing, a life somewhere else. A pause, worth knowing, I figure. Silas looked at him. Hale held the look without flinching, steady and kind, something in his own expression that Silas, who wasn't blind to things, who paid the same close attention Jesse did, just trained himself not to react to it, registered clearly. I know that, Silas said. All right, Hale glanced at the mare, she's moving better. Yeah, another week she'll be sound. They finished the coffee without saying more about it. Hale went back to the jailhouse. Silas stood by the trough a while, feeling the weight of it settle. On the 10th night, Jesse stopped hiding what he wrote. No production about it, he simply didn't flip the page over when Silas came in. He kept writing a moment while Silas settled onto the stool, several pages deep into something, and when he finally looked up there was something different in his face. A little more open, a little less armored. Your brother again? Silas asked. No. Jesse looked at the pages, set the pencil down, held them a moment, thinking. I've been writing things down, he said. What I remember from the fence, the time, the light which brands all of it. A pause, and other things. What other things? Jesse looked at the folded pages. Things I want to remember. A long pause. About being in here, about this. The lamp burned warm and low. Outside, wind moved through the cottonwoods like water. Jesse, Silas started. You said you weren't asking for anything, Jesse said, still looking at the pages. I know you weren't. He looked up, and his face was more open than Silas had ever seen it, all that careful layering simply gone, and underneath it something complicated and honest and afraid in a way that looked nothing like the fear of a caged man. I'm not sure how to do this. I'm not someone who. He stopped, pressed his lips together, gathered himself. I want to try. You don't have to explain it, Silas said quietly. I know, I want to. Jesse set the papers on the cot. I grew up deciding there were things I just wasn't going to look at, told myself they weren't real or weren't mine to claim. Mostly that worked, mostly I was fine. He met Silas's eyes. Then I ended up in here with someone who listens like. He stopped. Like what? Silas asked. Like you're not waiting for your turn to talk, like what I say actually lands somewhere. A beat. Like he stopped again. Like you're here, Silas said softly. Jesse held his gaze. Yeah, he said, almost a whisper, like I'm here. The bars sat between them, 3 inches of iron. Silas could have reached through and touched the hand resting on the cot, well within reach, and he was aware of that with an ache that bordered on pain. He didn't move. He sat very still and held Jesse's eyes and felt the fullness of the moment settle around them both, enormous and careful. I don't know what I am, Jesse said quietly with the particular courage honesty takes after a long silence. Never let myself find out, but I think, he swallowed, I think maybe I've been scared of the wrong things. Something warm and enormous filled Silas's chest, aching at the edges. What were you scared of? That it'd be real, Jesse said, and then somebody would take it. The silence was total. The lamp burned steady. I understand that, Silas said, and he did with everything in him, that specific fear of the real, the way it's safer to live in the almost than the yes. I know you do, Jesse said. I think that's. He stopped. Part of it, Silas offered. Part of it, Jesse agreed. They held each other's gaze a long, full, motionless moment, and neither looked away, and the iron between them was cold and 3 inches wide, and Silas felt it acutely, not only as a barrier. On the 11th day, Coombs came to the jailhouse. Silas was in the barn when he saw the man ride up, small and weathered on a tired horse, tying off at the rail with the careful movements of someone who's made a decision and doesn't want time to second-guess it. Silas watched from the barn door, felt the careful architecture of the last 11 days shift around a new possibility, and let Hale handle it. Stayed put, pretending to check a saddle cinch, watching through the cracked door as Hale met Coombs on the porch, as something passed between them, paper folded several times. Hale's eyes went still the way they did when he was working through something. Coombs said a few more words, Hale nodded, and Coombs rode off without once glancing toward the barn. Silas gave it 10 minutes, then crossed the yard. Hale was at his desk, papers spread out, and looked up with an expression carrying several things at once. You talked to him, Hale said. Watered my horse at his well. Silas. I know. Hale looked at the papers. These are sworn statements, 2 pages, detailed Whitlock's men running irons on cattle that aren't his, names, dates, places. He looked up, says he'll testify. Something loosened in Silas's chest, something tight for 11 days. That's enough, more than enough. Hale leaned back, rubbing his jaw. I'll bring this to Ackerman. A pause. There's going to be questions about how Coombs decided to come forward. I know. He's going to ask if anyone talked to him. Silas met his eyes steadily. I know. Hale studied him a long moment, weighing it, then gathered the papers, tapped them square, and stood. Let me do the talking, he said. Silas had figured that after Coombs's statement, after Hale brought it to Ackerman, after Ackerman spent an afternoon visibly arguing with himself, and finally sent word to the circuit judge and county prosecutor, he'd figured the weight would lift and whatever sat between him and Jesse would settle into something with less of that urgent, compressed quality of the last 11 days. Instead, it got harder because now Jesse was almost certainly getting out, and that almost certainty came bundled with the almost certainty of his leaving, and the leaving meant the end of this particular shape their evenings had taken. Silas found himself on the stool outside Jesse's cell on the 12th night, unable to locate the easy footing they'd built that first week. Jesse felt it too. His sentences came shorter, more guarded, the pauses longer. They'd sat in silence a while when Jesse said, What happens when they let me out? Silas looked at the floor. You go home. That's not what I meant. I know. Can you try to answer it? Silas was quiet a moment. He thought of Hale's words at the trough, he's not staying, he's got a life somewhere else. He thought of the shape of his own life, the loft, the horses, the harness leather, the long, quiet years of being useful and invisible and fine. I think, Silas said carefully, what I feel for you is real, not something the bars and the lamp and the countdown manufactured. A pause. But I also don't know how to be someone who gets to have things, if that makes sense. It makes sense, Jesse looked at his own hands. I've spent my whole life taking care of other people's things, their cattle, their land, their problems. There's comfort in it. I know what I am when I'm doing it. And when you're not. Silas looked at his own hands. I don't know what I am, he said, then with a small sound that wasn't quite a laugh but had the same shape, there I go again. Jesse made the same sound, the real laugh, short and soft, the one that skipped past the gate. Silas looked up. Jesse was shaking his head, mouth tilted, and warmth moved through Silas almost painfully. Come here, Jesse said quietly, his voice different now, softer, more deliberate. Silas stood and crossed to the bars, close enough to see the clean edge of the healing cut above Jesse's eyebrow, close enough to see every detail in the lamplight, the dark brows, the whiskey eyes, the set of his jaw, and underneath the careful control, something Silas didn't have a clean word for but felt in his own chest like a matching pulse. Jesse reached through the bars and laid his hand over Silas's where it rested on the iron. Just that palm over knuckles, warm and still, not a grip, not a pull, just weight. Silas didn't move. He felt the warmth travel through him like something slowly coming undone. Jesse started, stopped. His thumb moved slightly over Silas's knuckle. I don't want this to end just because the trial does, he said. I want us to choose what this is, not have circumstances choose it for us. I want that too, Silas said, barely above a whisper. Then let me, Jesse's fingers tightened slightly. When they let me out, let me ask you something. What? Don't make me ask it now, let me ask it standing on your side of these bars. Silas looked at him, faces close, the iron the only thing between them, close enough to feel the warmth coming off him. All right, Silas said. Jesse's hand stayed on his, neither moved for a long while. All right, Jesse echoed. On the 13th day, Ackerman called Silas in. Silas had been bracing for this for 3 days. He came through the door, hat in hand. Face arranged carefully neutral, and sat across the desk from a marshal regarding him with the tired patience of a man who isn't angry, just decided to be honest. Sit, Ackerman said. Silas sat. Hale tells me a witness came forward because somebody went out and talked to him. Ackerman laced his fingers. Going to ask you once, was that somebody you? Silas met his eyes. Yes. Ackerman looked at him a long moment, expression barely shifting. I need to understand something. You're a careful man, Bourne. Careful men don't go freelancing around the county talking to witnesses in a live case for no reason. A pause. So tell me why. I thought he was telling the truth, Calloway. I went in that first night, listened and believed him, and that was reason enough.
Yes. Why?
Silas held the marshal's gaze, chose the honest answer. Because somebody should have, he said. He was locked up and nobody was looking at his side of it. I figured somebody should. A long pause. Ackerman's face moved through several things, none of them simple. He looked at the desk, then back up. You're right, he said. Silas blinked. I didn't push hard enough, Ackerman said flatly, with the particular honesty of a man owning his own failure, however much it cost him to say it. Evidence looked clean. I was tired. I didn't dig. That's on me. A pause. Doesn't make what you did any less of a problem. You went around me, and that can't be how this works. But it also, he pressed his lips together, appears to have worked out. Silas waited. I'm not firing you, Ackerman said. I'm telling you plain this wasn't your call, and if you pull something like it again without bringing it to me first, I will fire you. And I'm telling you I'm going to do a better job on this Whitlock business than I have so far because apparently this county's got a fraud problem I've been looking past and I don't care for that about myself. A pause. We clear.
Yes, sir.
Good. Ackerman picked up his pen. Judge arrives tomorrow. Calloway likely walks the day after. He glanced up dry. In the meantime, you'll limit your contact with him to what any other prisoner gets. A pointed look, which I notice isn't what you've been giving him every single night. Silas's neck went warm. Yes, sir. I'm 54 years old, Ackerman said, writing. Been married 29 years. I know what it looks like when a man's trying hard to be somewhere else in his head. He didn't look up. Go check the mare's tendon. Silas went. He didn't go to the jailhouse that 13th night. He stayed in the loft, stared at the rafters, listened to the barn breathe around him, horses shifting, hay settling, and thought about what Ackerman had said and what tomorrow would bring. He thought about Jesse across the yard in the dark, wondered if he was sleeping, wondered what he might be writing on those pages. Sleep didn't come easy. The owl was back, resettling somewhere above. He let the familiar sounds try to calm the thing moving in his chest, part dread, part something with no clean name, just the shape of standing at the edge of something large. Morning came. He fed the horses, checked the mare, nearly sound, one more week, and stood in the barn door watching the jailhouse in the early light. The circuit judge arrived at noon in a dusty black coat. By 2, Ackerman, Hale, the judge, the county prosecutor, and Jesse's appointed counsel had been shut up inside for an hour. Silas worked through the afternoon with a thoroughness bordering on aggressive, every task done twice, every surface checked, every tool inspected with a precision that was pure displacement, and he knew it. At 4, the jailhouse door opened. Jesse stepped out into the afternoon light, hat in one hand, jacket in the other, squinting against the brightness, not yet looking Silas's way. Silas just watched him a moment, the set of his shoulders, the way he tipped his face up to the sun as if confirming the sky was still where he'd left it. Then Jesse turned and found Silas standing in the barn doorway, and across the dusty yard, 20 feet of October light between them, they looked at each other. Silas felt his heart do the thing it had been doing for 13 days, complicated and hopeful and afraid, but now with Jesse standing free in the sun, the bars behind him and nothing between them but air, it felt larger. Jesse started walking. He stopped 2 feet away, close enough to see every detail. The cut above his eye healed to a thin, clean line, dust still caught in his hair from 2 weeks of a jail cell's limited washing, his eyes catching the afternoon light, almost gold in it. He looked at Silas with the most open expression Silas had ever seen on him, no careful layering left at all, fully present in a way Silas had only glimpsed before through iron. I said I'd ask you something, Jesse said.
I remembered.
Jesse took a breath. I'm heading back to Tanner's Crossing. My family needs to hear what happened and I need to talk to my father about Whitlock, things to settle. A pause. Few weeks maybe, he paused again, and then I'm coming back here. You don't have to do that, Silas said. I know I don't have to, Jesse stepped closer. Silas, his voice was steady, quiet, direct. I'm asking if you want me to. The afternoon sat warm and enormous and still. A horse moved in the paddock with a slow rhythm. The cottonwood behind the jailhouse turned its leaves in a breath of wind, silver and green. Silas thought of every careful, hedged, reasonable answer, the ones about distance, about uncertainty, about the particular loneliness of hopping for things. He looked at Jesse standing there in the light, open, present, asking him plainly, the only way Jesse Calloway ever asked anything. Yes, Silas said, I want you to. Something moved through Jesse's face, quiet, profound, a kind of arrival, the look of a man setting down a weight he'd carried too long. He closed the last step between them and laid his palm against Silas's jaw, warm and deliberate, and looked at him from that closeness, amber eyes in the afternoon light, his whole careful attention narrowed down to hear.
I'll be back in 3 weeks, Jesse said. I'll be here.
Jesse leaned in and rested his forehead against Silas's. Just that, forehead to forehead, eyes closed, breathing the same air in the October afternoon, the quietest, most complete kind of closeness. Silas felt the warmth and weight of him, the realness of him, and felt something in his own chest open like a room whose door hadn't been touched in years. They stood there a long moment. Then Jesse stepped back, his hand lingering warm against Silas's jaw a beat longer before falling away.
3 weeks, Jesse said again. 3 weeks.
Jesse turned and went to collect his horse. 3 weeks stretches longer when you're counting through it on purpose. Silas had waited for plenty in his life, money to add up, seasons to turn, some fuller version of his own life to arrive, and knew the particular texture waiting takes on, the way it turns ordinary days slightly see-through, like you can look right through them toward something on the other side. This waiting felt different, this one had a name. He worked, fed the horses, checked fences, mended what needed mending, talked with Ackerman about the Whitlock matter, which kept growing in ways that made the marshal steadily more invested and steadily more unhappy. 2 more witnesses had come forward following Coombs's lead, and the county prosecutor in Prescott had gotten involved, with a letter from the Territorial Attorney General's office besides. Garrett Whitlock, it turned out, had been patient enough to build something enormous, and enormous things come down slow, then all at once. Silas talked with Hale more too, now that the old tension around the cell visits had eased. Hale turned out to be a man who thought things through carefully and said exactly what he meant, which Silas found restful in its own specific way. "He's coming back," Hale said one afternoon at the paddock rail, not a question.
Yeah.
Hale nodded, looked at the horses. "Good," he said. Silas glanced at him. "Good." Hale chose his next word with visible care. "You've seemed," he tried again, "more here these past weeks, like you're actually present." Silas thought about that the rest of the afternoon, turning it over the way he turned over everything. More here. He thought of the talk with Jesse about feeling invisible. He thought about the whole structure of the life he'd assembled in Cottonwood Bend, how carefully it had been built around being useful and unasking and fine. How much effort it had taken to live inside it without examining the walls too closely. He thought about Jesse saying, "I decided I just wasn't going to look at certain things, and mostly that worked. Mostly I was fine." Silas knew that exact feeling. He'd been living in mostly fine a long time. It was a real place, not a false one, but smaller than he'd let himself admit. He thought about forehead against forehead in October light, a warm hand against his jaw, and 3 weeks. The second week, it rained, the late autumn kind that comes with real intention, slow and gray and patient, turning roads to mud and pushing everyone indoors with their own thoughts. Silas spent 2 days in the barn working slow and thorough by lamplight, rain drumming steady overhead. He wrote a letter. He'd been composing it in his head for days, revising it. Finally, he sat down at the old workbench and put it to paper. It wasn't long. He wasn't a man comfortable with long letters and their particular nakedness, but it said what needed saying, that he was still there, that the mare's tendon had healed sound, that the Whitlock matter was shaping into something that might finally count for something, and that he found himself thinking more than he'd expected to about what a fully occupied life might look like. He didn't put it in those exact words. He found another way to say it. The letter understood what it meant. He sent it north with a supply rider. He didn't expect a reply before Jesse's return, but one came on the 18th day in Jesse's careful hand, 3 pages. Silas read it in the loft with the rain still falling and the horses breathing below, read certain lines twice, then folded it carefully and tucked it into his copy of the 3 Musketeers, between pages he'd long since memorized. He lay back and looked at the rafters and felt the full weight of 3 weeks ago and 1 week from now and everything in between. The rain stayed steady. The lamp stayed warm. And Silas Bourne, who had spent years building a life designed around having little to lose, lay in the dark and felt the enormous, frightening, irreversible reality of having something to wait for. Jesse came back on the morning of the 21st day when the mud from the rain had dried to a pale crust and the sky had scoured itself a deep, clean blue. Silas was at the bench outside the barn working a harness that didn't really need the work when he heard hooves on the road and looked up. Jesse rode a different horse this time. A rangy roan with a good stride, wearing a clean jacket and the same dark hat, looking the way people look when they've rested and are riding towards something instead of away from it. Lighter, or maybe it was just the sky. He reined up at the rail and swung down with the ease of someone who'd been riding since before he could walk, tied off, turned and found Silas across 10 feet of clean morning light. the cottonwoods turning gold at their edges. "You're here," Jesse said. "Said I would be." Jesse crossed toward him with that same deliberateness, no hesitation, no second-guessing, the opposite of Silas's own careful habits. He stopped 2 feet off, close enough to see the cut above his eye fully healed now, just a thin pale line, his eyes clear in the light. He looked at Silas the way he had that last afternoon in the jail yard. Open, present, nothing held back. "Thought about something the whole ride back," Jesse said.
"What?"
"What I want," he said it plainly, the way a man says something he's practiced. "I want to know if you want the same thing, not in general, specifically."
"Specifically," Silas said.
"I want to stay," Jesse said. "Not necessarily Cottonwood Bend itself, don't know the shape of that part yet, but I want," he gathered himself, "I want to know if you want to find out with me, where this goes, what it turns into, not because of bars and lamplight and an emergency forcing the question, because," he stopped.
"Because," Silas said softly.
"Because I think you're the most real person I've ever met," Jesse said, "and I've been living in mostly fine for so long I'd half forgotten what real felt like, and I don't want to go back to it." He held Silas's eyes. "I want to know if you feel that too." The morning was warm on Silas's back. The roan shifted at the rail. Somewhere behind the jailhouse, the cottonwood let go a few gold leaves into the light breeze.
"Yes," Silas said, the simplest answer, the truest one. "I feel it."
Jesse's whole face changed. The control never fully left, it was part of him, but something underneath came all the way forward. Warm, open, glad, the realest version of his face Silas had seen yet. Jesse reached out and took his hand, not through bars this time, just took it, fingers folding together, certain in the morning air.
"Okay," Jesse said. "Okay."
The weeks that followed had a different texture than any Silas could remember, not because they were dramatic, mostly they weren't, but because of an ordinary fullness he hadn't known he was missing until it arrived. Jesse stayed in Cottonwood Bend, taking a room at the boarding house on the south end of Maine, intending to see the Whitlock matter through. He'd written to Prescott, met with the Attorney General's representative, given full testimony, and the investigation had swelled into something occupying several of the county's lawyers and a fair stretch of column space in the territorial paper. Garrett Whitlock wasn't arrested, not yet, not in those early weeks. But the law, once properly turned his way, moved slow and patient in a manner even his resources couldn't fully outrun. Jesse found work with a horse rancher north of town who needed a man who understood cattle and didn't mind early mornings. He'd ride out before dawn, come back in late afternoon, and some evenings stop by the barn in that last hour of daylight. They'd talk over the paddock rail in the cooling air, or walk the creek south of town, or sit up in the loft on good nights, listening to the horses breathe below. The talking had a different quality now, not that the cell conversations had been false, they were the most honest talks Silas had ever had, and the paradox of that wasn't lost on him. But those had happened under the pressure of bars and lamplight and a countdown. These happened in open daylight with the real space of an undecided future stretching ahead. They talked about what they each wanted, not a comfortable conversation, the kind that asks you to sit with not knowing rather than resolve it too fast, but an honest one. Silas found he preferred that kind of honesty to comfort bought at its expense. Jesse wanted to ranch, not for someone else, eventually for himself, building slow the way his father had. He had a feel for land the way some people have an ear for music, something native to him. He talked soil and water rights and grass rotation with the same total focus he brought to everything, and Silas listened with his whole body, the way he always did, and felt the particular pleasure of someone else's passion becoming legible to him. The way music is legible when you love it, even without being able to play a note. Silas talked too, more than he was used to. He talked about the invisible feeling, working it out loud in Jesse's presence because Jesse's quality of attention made the working out feel safe instead of exposed. He talked about his brother, for the first time in years, the road they'd parted on, the silence since, the specific grief that comes with an estrangement that isn't quite final. Jesse listened the way he always did, fully asking direct, careful questions, never trying to fix it, just receiving it. "Do you miss him?" Jesse asked once on the creek bank. "I miss who I thought he was," Silas said after a pause. "Not sure I miss who he turned out to be." He looked at the water. "Probably not very generous of me." "It's honest," Jesse said, "those aren't always the same thing. Often they're not. But this time I think it's both." Silas glanced at him. Jesse was watching the creek, late sun catching it amber and red, his profile still and thoughtful, that same absolute alertness Silas had noticed the very first night, now simply a constant, something he moved through his days alongside. You're doing it again, Silas said. What? Asking something while sounding casual about it. Jesse smiled, a real one this time, the whole thing, not the ghosted version. Habit, he said. I know I like it. Jesse's smile softened. Yeah. Yeah. On a Friday evening in the 5th week, they sat in the loft with the lamp burning, Jesse's correspondence spread over the bedroll, the slow-moving paperwork on the Whitlock case, when Jesse found a page that wasn't about the case at all. He picked it up, read it, and Silas watched his expression shift and knew exactly what it was before he said anything. The letter, the first one, the one Silas hadn't been sure Jesse had kept. Jesse read it slowly all the way through, then folded it with care and looked at Silas, his face full and quiet and entirely undefended. You wrote, Jesse said, quoting it softly from memory, that you'd found yourself thinking about what a fully occupied life might look like. I did. What did you mean? Silas thought about the careful distance he'd put between the words and the thing he actually meant. I meant I'd been living in a house with some of the rooms shut up, he said, and I didn't want to keep doing that. Jesse set the letter down between them. He reached over and laid his hand on Silas's shoulder, not dramatically, just the warm, certain weight of it resting there like it was saying, I'm here, you're here, that's the whole of it. Silas felt the warmth move through him from that point outward. Which rooms? Jesse asked quietly. The ones that needed me to stop pretending I was fine. Jesse's hand pressed slightly, the smallest increase, an acknowledgement without words. Are they open now? Silas thought about the last 5 weeks, the walking, the talking, the clean light of October sliding into November. The way sleep had changed, gone deeper, less armored against the dark. The way the loft had stopped feeling like a place to wait and started feeling like a place to come back to. Getting there, he said. Yeah, getting there. Jesse stayed close in the lamplight, his hand still resting on Silas's shoulder, the horses breathing below, the night vast and quiet past the cracks in the wall. They stayed that way a long while. The formal investigation wrapped up in December. Whitlock's lawyers fought it hard, with plenty of resources behind them, but Coombs had testified, 3 more hands had come forward, and the brand records and land filings told a story plain enough for anyone willing to read it. In the end, Whitlock was charged with fraud and cattle theft on a scale the territorial paper called the largest agricultural fraud case the county had seen. He didn't go to prison, men with his kind of money and lawyers rarely did, in the Arizona Territory of 1887 or anywhere else, but he paid a heavy fine and surrendered the 2 parcels he'd taken through rigged prosecutions. The displaced ranchers got the chance to buy their land back at its value before the fraud. One did, the other had already moved on, and his land went to the county, opened for homesteading. Jesse testified formally in December. Silas sat in the back of the small courtroom and watched him give his account from the stand, steady, precise, every word chosen with care, that same total focus turned now on the circuit judge and a room full of onlookers. He didn't look toward Silas while testifying. But when he stepped down and the proceeding moved on to the next witness, he crossed the room and sat beside him in the back row, and Silas felt the warmth of his shoulder against his own, and the case carried on around them, and neither of them moved away. Afterward, out in the cold December street, Jesse stood with his hands in his coat pockets, breath showing in the air, looking up at the sky like a man finally able to set something down. It's done, he said. It's done, Silas agreed. Jesse looked at him. What are you thinking? That I don't know what comes next, Silas said with full honesty, and I find I don't mind. Jesse held his gaze, something in his face that Silas wanted to call happy but knew was more specific than that, more interior, the kind of expression you only catch on someone if you know them well enough to see underneath. The look of a man who'd spent a long time afraid of real things and somehow arrived at a place where they weren't so frightening anymore. Me either, Jesse said. They stood together in the cold, breath clouding the air between them, the street ordinary and busy around them, horses at rails, women with market baskets, men talking outside the hardware store, and the 2 of them stood in the middle of it, simply there in the full ordinary aliveness of it, without armor or distance. Jesse put his hand briefly on Silas's arm through his coat sleeve. Just a moment, just the warmth of it, then let it drop. Come on, Jesse said, it's cold. Where are we going? Jesse started walking, glanced back over his shoulder with that full, real smile that still hit Silas like afternoon light every time. Don't know, he said. Let's find out. Silas followed. Epilogue with the stable hand unlocked. Spring came to Cottonwood Bend in stages, the way it always did, reluctant at first. A little sun, then cold again, the creek swelling with runoff from the northern peaks, grass greening slow across the flats, the paddock horses restless with the season. Silas turned 30 that spring of 1888, and his life had taken a shape he hadn't planned for, which was the most interesting thing about it. Jesse had leased a parcel 5 miles north of town, 30-some acres of decent grass and a spring that ran clean even through dry months, and was deep into the careful first year of building something there. A handful of cattle, a small string of horses, the slow architecture of a beginning. Silas rode out on his days off and worked alongside him, sometimes staying nights in Jesse's small, solid house, the two of them talking at the table long after the lamp should have been put out, the dark outside full of stars, the horses breathing in the small corral. He kept his post with the marshal. Ackerman, in the aftermath of the Whitlock case, had turned out to be a man capable of real self-examination, quieter now, less certain of himself in a way that made him better at the job, more willing to hear things he didn't want to hear. Hale was a proper friend now in the way that had been building toward it all along. Even Ackerman's wife, Della, who brought Silas pie on his birthday and asked careful questions about his life with an innocence that wasn't innocent in the slightest, had become part of the fabric of Cottonwood Bend that Silas had chosen to live inside. He was here now fully, the way Hale had said he hadn't been before, not waiting for something to end or begin or resolve, not rationing his energy for a long fight, just here. One April evening, he rode out to Jesse's place after work, the day's last light slanting gold across the flats, the air carrying new grass and the freshness that follows an afternoon rain. Jesse was in the corral working a young horse, moving with the patient specificity of a man who'd found the thing he was built for, and he looked up at the sound of hooves on the road, his face doing the thing Silas loved, the whole unguarded look of someone genuinely glad to see another person walk into their evening. "You're late," Jesse said as Silas tied off at the rail. "Bay threw a shoe, had to reset it." "She all right?" "Fine." Silas leaned on the corral rail and watched Jesse work the young horse, that small language of weight and stillness. "Coming along," Silas said. "Another month," Jesse agreed, easing the horse to a stop, one hand on its neck, its breathing slowing. He looked over the top rail, amber eyes catching the last of the light. "Staying tonight?" "If that's all right." "Always all right?" The way he said it, steady, simple, no need for drama, was somehow more than all right. It was the thing itself. They closed up the corral together, fed the animals, banked the stove against the cool spring night. They made a simple meal in Jesse's small kitchen, moving around each other with the easy practicality of two people who'd learned each other's rhythms. They ate at the table with the lamp between them, talking about the horse, the cattle, a letter from Jesse's father about maybe bringing some of the home herd down in summer, whether the road between here and there was worth widening. After dinner, Silas washed and Jesse dried, and somehow that was as beautiful as anything, the small, specific domesticity of it, the particular intimacy of two people moving through ordinary tasks in a shared space. When the lamp burned low and the night had settled fully around the house, Jesse sat beside him on the bench by the window, looking out at the spring dark, and Silas sat beside him, shoulders touching, looking at the same dark. "Been thinking about something," Jesse said. "What?" "What this place looks like in 10 years, a pause, whether you'd want to be part of it." Silas turned to look at him. Jesse was still watching the window, his profile soft in the low lamplight, patient and careful and fully present. "Jesse," Silas said. Jesse looked at him. "Yeah." Silas held his gaze, the full open look there, the real one underneath. "You didn't let me finish," Jesse said. "I know, but I know what it was." "How?" "Because you always ask the question you actually mean." Jesse looked at him a moment longer, then a sound escaped him, the real laugh, short and soft and unguarded, no permission needed for it. He shook his head, then put his arm around Silas's shoulders, and Silas leaned into it. And they sat together in the lamplight with the spring dark outside, the horses breathing in the corral, and the whole long, uncertain real future stretched out ahead of them, entirely their own. "Yeah," Jesse said after a long while, "yeah, I guess I do." Silas closed his eyes. The night was warm, the lamp low, Jesse's arms solid around him, and he thought about iron bars and lamplight and a three-legged stool, and a man on a cot with his hands hanging open between his knees like a question. He thought about the exact moment a person stops refusing to look at certain things. He thought about all the ways a life bends without asking permission toward what's real. He thought, "I unlocked something, but it wasn't the cell, it was me." He leaned a little further into Jesse's warmth. The night sat enormous around them, the same stars over the same high desert, ancient and indifferent and beautiful. Somewhere outside, a night bird called once, small and clear, carrying across the dark. Inside, two men sat quiet together and the spring went on around them. Some men are built to be kept in, some men are built to do the keeping, and most men spend their whole lives never asking which one they actually are. Silas Bourne spent 13 nights on a three-legged stool outside an iron cell before he finally found out which one he was.
Closing/CTA.
Did you feel that? If you stayed all the way to the end, if your chest tightened when Jesse walked out of that cell and found Silas waiting in the doorway, if you've ever had something real feel frightening right before it felt right, this one was for you. Silas spent 2 years in Cottonwood Bend learning how to disappear. He spent 13 nights on a stool learning what that cost him. And Jesse spent a lifetime refusing to look at certain things until a stranger walked through a jailhouse door with no good reason to be there and everything changed. If this one got to you, drop a like, it helps more people find it. Subscribe for more LGBTQ+ stories. Tell me in the comments which moment hit hardest. My guess is the forehead touch, but I want to hear yours. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.